Hey y'all, we're going to do a quick little demo of the stuff we did in class the other day. Just doing some more practical stuff. So we're going to animate some text. And there's some great new tools in Maya 2017 that let us animate some text really quick. It's not quite as robust as using like the Mash, where is it right here? The Mash plugin, but if you're making like some students were doing like live streaming or making their own films or whatever, this is a great little quick way to create some really good looking text really quickly, and it's got a lot of uses, so a little bit more practical. So let's get started. I don't want to make this one too long, and it should be fairly easy to follow along, so I'll probably go a little bit quicker than normal. You just feel free to pause and do whatever you need to do. Okay, so let's get started here with some text. So there's a ton of different ways. There's like in Maya, there's a million different buttons. We could use this orange T button. I think if you go to the graphics tab, it's over here, or you can go create, type. But for some reason, mine is grayed out. So I'm going to click that. And okay, so I think some of the students in class had this problem too. So what I'm going to do is go to settings, preferences, settings, plugin manager, and I'm going to look for my type plugin, and I'm guessing that it's turned off, and it is. So just click those two guys there, make sure auto load on, just hit refresh. And now if I go to create, there it is. It's not grayed out anymore. So if you go to create tab and your type is turned off, that's most likely the culprit. Because everything in Maya is essentially a plugin, if something's missing, like your Arnold renderer or something like that, it's always going to be in your plugins manager. Okay, so create, type, and give it a sec, and some type will show up. Give my computer a minute. Sorry, I think it's a little slow because the screen recording makes things a little bit slower, I've noticed. So here's my 3D type. So what I'm going to do is go over to my attribute editor. Your attribute editor is turned off. You can find it here. And if you look at all the nodes that are attached to your type, this type geometry, just go to type 1. And here's all your options for type. I'll open up my outliner, and there you can see there is the type mesh. So if you're not clicked on there, click on there, boom, comes up. So I'm going to type, you can make your own title, whatever you want. I'm just going to use my name, just like we did in class. And pick your fonts here. I had some kind of cowboy font that I really liked. It seemed to work really good. And this is sort of an open-ended assignment, so I'm going to show you what I did in class, but I really want you guys to sort of take it and do whatever you like with it. Rockwell, that was it. Love it! Look at that cowboy kind of western theme font. Okay, so it's pretty similar to what you'd find your type tool in Illustrator or Photoshop, After Effects, that kind of thing. So alignment, you can center justify, right justify, do all that. Increase your font size. Maybe I'll make mine kind of a little bit smaller here. Size it up to the grid a little bit. Doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. I'm just showing you what you can do. Maybe I'll just stick that to 5. You can adjust your kerning, tracking, all that kind of thing. And what else do we got here? So tons of different options in here so if you go into the geometry tab, we can adjust, here I'll just do that a little bit. You can adjust your extrude distance, so you can make it thicker, thinner. I like mine kind of blocky. I thought that looked kind of cool, so I'll make mine like I'll just type 2 in there. We can add a bevel if you like. I find the bevel is a little glitchy, but we'll try it out here. And you can adjust like how the bevel looks. So if you look at this curve here, it's kind of rounded. And look at our bevel from the side here, and it's kind of rounded. So you can adjust the profile of the curve. I like a straight up bevel like that, like a hard bevel. And I think I'll decrease my bevel a little bit. So maybe I'll put that to like 0.1. Bevel offset, there you go. So now it's not quite as pronounced, but I like a little bit of a bevel because when you get some lights in there, it kind of catches the lights a little bit differently and highlights the edges of your text. So lots of different options here. Another thing that shows up, and we might run into this later, we'll probably come back to these mesh settings and use, if you go mesh settings, deformable type, some students are having a problem, and just because of like your text getting a little bit garbled. If that happens, you can always click on deformable type, and what that does is it takes the faces and just sort of splits them up so they're not one big chunk. So if I turn that off, you can see that the geometry is just one solid cap here. So I can do that, and then you can actually adjust the match max edge length, and it will, you can adjust how that deformable type sort of divides the geometry. So that's another option there too if you're having some troubles. I think it's probably a good idea to leave it on. Before I go any further, I'm going to save this as motion graphic text. Okay, so there's some options you can look into. We'll be coming back to this, but right now I'm just going to go and hit render, and it should be black. Yep, because I don't have any light. So what I like to do is just sort of set up the scene before I get into animation, just so I can sort of check it as I go. So what you might want to do is make sure that you've got Arnold as your renderer. And let's set up some render settings here. I'm going to go scene. I'll just call it motion graphics text. Image format, we don't want EXR. I'm just going to put mine to TIFF. Compression, none. So right now it's on, so if you look at a frame range, it's grayed out because it's on single frame. So I'm going to put name.hashtag.extension, and looks like we've got about 120 frames, so I'm just going to stick that to 120 frames. Renderable camera, I'm just going to leave it on perspective view for now. Sometimes I render out perspective view, so whatever view you've got in here is the view it's going to render, which is fine. So that looks pretty good for now. I might come back and change this a little later. And you can always see where your images are going to render to. So up at the top there. Okay, what's next? So we've got a black frame, right? When we render, we got a black render. So we need to add some lights. So let's go to the Arnold tab and add a sky dome light, and you'll see it show up in your outliner over here. And right now it's just white. So we want to add that nice physical sky so we get that sort of nice sort of daytime look. So I'm going to go over, I'm going to click on my sky dome light, and I'm going to go over to the color attribute and click on the little checkered flag, and I'm going to go down to texture and find AI physical sky, and I'm going to plug it into my light. And you'll notice that it just makes our light black because the texture is applied. So I know we remember doing this a few times before. We're going to change the sun size, and this just softens up your shadows a little bit. So I might just put that at 20. And I'm going to change the elevation of the light a little bit so it's a little bit more overhead. And we can always adjust this too. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my dome, sky dome light. I'm going to increase the intensity to about 3. And let's just take a look at that. Ah, perfect. Looks good already. The sky dome light's great for just sort of really nice lighting right out of the box. Works pretty good. But what you will notice is that, yeah, it renders pretty quick, but it is also very, very grainy. So I'm going to close that, and oh, something happened upstairs. And I'm going to change my samples. I'm going to put it up to about 3. And now let's do another render and give it a sec. There we go. And now it's much, much less grainy. So, and you can see what I mean by that bevel catching the light. You can see sort of the light just sort of pinging off the edges of my geometry, which I think gives a nice effect, makes the text stand out a little bit more, maybe a little bit easier to read as well. Okay, so one more thing I want to do is open up my Hypershade, and I'm going to make once my Hypershade opens, I'm going to make a new shader. So I'm going to go down to Arnold Shader, and let's just drop that down, surface, and what I'm looking for is our good old AI standard. So I'm going to click on that once, and let's rename that to text shader. And let's apply the shader. So I'm going to click on my mesh. I can do it in the viewport or in the outliner, it doesn't matter. And I'm going to right click here and go assign material to selection. I'll undo that and show you another way. So if I go here, right click, I can always go assign existing material, text shader. It's exactly the same thing. 2 different ways of getting the same outcome. So let's play around with the shader a bit. So let's maybe change the color, make it a nice sort of red color. Oh, wait a sec, this isn't the right shader. There we go. I was wondering, why is my color not changing? So make sure you got the right shader selected here. And I want to make this a nice sort of red, maybe a little bit stronger, and maybe we'll give it a little bit of reflection. So the reflection controls in the AI standard shader are right here, so let's make it a little bit shiny. So if I adjust the weight in the specular roll down, that's how reflective it is. And if I mess around with the roughness, that's how blurry the reflection is, and you can see that in the shader ball here. So I don't want it too blurry. I don't want it that reflective either, just a hint of it. Now let's just see what that looks like. Give it a sec. Yeah, that looks pretty cool. I like that. Maybe I'll make it a little bit more blurry. So I'm going to bring up my Hypershade again. Increase the roughness so you can see the highlights get spread out a little bit, maybe a little bit less. And let's just render that out again. Yeah, I like that a little bit better. So it's looking a little bit dark too, so I think I might increase the intensity a little bit, and I'm gonna go into my sky again, and I might adjust the azimuth angle. So that's sort of where the light is around sort of the horizon. See what that looks like. It's a little bit darker. Try the other end. I wish it would show up in the viewport to give you an idea of where the actual light is, but it doesn't like to do that. So just play around with this till you got something that you like. I'm just a little bit finicky, so maybe I'll move that elevation down just a slight bit. Just trying to find something that I like. That looks a bit dark still. Give my computer a chance to wake up. Uh-oh. Give it a sec. Oh, it's still working actually. It's just, sorry about that. Alright, let's change that. See if we can. There we go. I like that a little bit better. A little bit brighter. There, yeah. Well, let's just call that good for now. I'm going to save this. My computer seems to be acting kind of strange. So, okay, so now our scene's set up. We're happy with the look of our text. You can play around with that till the cows come home. So just play around with it till you get something that you like. But don't need that anymore. So what I want to do now is actually start animating our text. So I'm going to close that. Leave this up. So now to animate our text, it's quite simple. So I'm going to go to my type mesh over here, and I'm going to make my outliner a little bit smaller. And just like before, I'm going to find my type node here. There we go. And so this is where you adjust your text settings. This is where you adjust the extrusion depth, your bevels, all that fun stuff, anything to do with the geometry. Texturing, pretty simple. It's got my text shader in there. I rarely use the texturing thing here, but animation is what we want. So I'm going to click on animate, and that will open up all my animation controls, and it's very simple. So we've got translate, rotate, and scale, just like we do up here, which is where we normally animate. However, what's cool about this is that it's actually per character, which you can set right here. You can do character, word, or line. Now, if I was to animate this text just using our regular old channel box, it would animate this whole entire word as one object. The cool thing about doing it this way is that it will actually animate per character if I have it set here to character. So I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to go over to about maybe frame 20, and I will set a key on rotation, and I'm just going to set it at 0. Then I'm going to go over to frame 1, and I'll type in 180 here, set a key, and you have to sort of jiggle this for it to update. And now look what happens. It animates each character individually rotating. So if I was to do it up here, it would look probably more like this. Oh, except that doesn't want to go. But it would animate the word as one object. But if I go to character, it does it individually, which is super cool. And you'll notice that sometimes when you're animating in the attribute editor, your keyframes don't show up here as the little red ticks. So what you need to do is select right here. There's always this select button. So I'm going to select that. And that selects it and puts it down here on the timeline. So just a little tip there. Okay, the other cool thing about this text animator is this delay frames. So what this means is that it is going to, this is how many frames it's going to wait until it starts the next character. So if I put that down to say 15, it's going to do it much quicker, which I think is cool. Because usually text, you want it to animate fairly quickly. People more or less just want to read what you've got as opposed to watch a fancy text animation. So there you go. We've got some really cool text animating. So what I want to do now is maybe just do a few more options here. So let's add some keys on scale. At this point, we're messing around pretty quickly, so I'm going to put on auto key right here, so I don't have to set the key every time. Just be really aware that that is on, because it trips me up a lot. So I'm just going to type in 0, 0, and 0, and now it's going to sort of come in from nowhere. I kind of like that effect. So I want you guys to play around with it. You know, you can play around with there's all kinds of things you can do. We can translate, have our text sort of animate in, as it were. So if I do that and then put like, I don't know, 50, try that. Now it's going to come in from off screen. So that's kind of a neat effect. Kind of comes from behind the camera. Which is pretty darn cool. Or we could have it come from way back in the distance. So if I put minus here, it's going to come in like that. I think that looks pretty sweet. You can, there's all kinds of stuff you can do. I had it in class where it was bouncing a little bit. So if we open up our graph editor here, we can animate, what would it be? It would be rotate Y. There we go. So I'll just make this a little bit bigger. Actually, you know what? I'm going to switch my workspace to animation. Wait for it to wake up. There we go. That's a little better. Okay, so maybe I'll add a keyframe on 30, 40, and 50. And we'll sort of get this little bounce going with the rotation, so it sort of over-rotates, overshoots. Maybe one there, one there, one there, and so let's make it, I'm just going to click on my move tool and, oops, move that down a little bit so our curve overshoots, and then it'll overshoot on the other side, and then just a little bit for the last one. There, let's see how that looks. There we go, so it's kind of like bouncing around a little bit. Another thing, let's just make sure our playback settings are good. So I want it to play every frame, 24, yeah, that's right. Cool, so you could do that same technique, you're sort of overshooting with, you know, the Z value as well, so it sort of like bounces around when it flies in, or even the scale, so it would scale up a little bit more, down. I don't know. These are just some ideas I'm trying to give you guys. You guys get creative with it. All I want you to do is just animate some text. You can make it cheesy. You can do anything you want. And the other thing too is I want you guys to do is just have some kind of other object. Like motion graphics, like I said in class, is all about sort of like, a lot of the time anyways, is about sort of more abstract stuff. Doesn't have to be like these crazy complicated shapes. Like you could add in, like what did I do in class? I did like a cube. So we kind of went for the Jerry Seinfeld logo look. I don't know. It was just off the top of my head. So, where are my tools? My move tools. So I'm going to set that to object, so it moves with the object. And very simple cube. Maybe I'll try just make it sort of, I don't know, slide in like I did before. I don't know. I'm out of ideas here, but I want you guys to come up with your own sort of weird abstract. Go get some reference. Go take a look at what's out there. Copy it. Get some inspiration from somewhere. So I'm gonna have this kind of slide into place after the text comes in, so I want it to be in about there. Go up here and animate all these. Make it come in from off camera. So let's see how that looks. Well, it's kind of intersecting there, so let's make that go a little bit longer. Cool. I don't know. I'm just messing around. Go get some inspiration from somewhere else. Maybe you could use some kind of spherical thing. I don't know. Some students were making some other types of abstract shapes. So that kind of flies in about there. I'll make these ones come in just a little bit after. It's good to offset things. Seems to be a common thing in motion graphics, just offsetting your duplicated animations. Oh. There we go. Maybe I'll oops. Make those go off screen a bit more. See how that looks? There we go. Give them a shader of some kind. Let's change the color. Make a couple more. I'm just waiting for my Hypershade to open here. Shader, AI standard, and we'll call this just like, I don't know, element 1, and maybe I'll make another one, call that element 2, and I'll make the first one element 1, assign that, and then I'll select both of these other ones and call that element 2, and we'll just go in here and change colors. I don't know, maybe I'll make this a blue. It's a bit heavy for the blue. And I'll make this one yellow, because I don't like yellow. I like to torture myself. Okay, so let's maybe make them a little bit shiny, just like we did before. Something like that. Render that. There we go. Motion graphics. Took us about half an hour to come up with something that you could use for one of your streaming presentations or one of your film projects or whatever you need it to do in the future. Very quick, and this is going to be better than anything that you make from better quality anyway, that you could make out of, like, I don't know, the sort of pre-made stuff that's out there. It's always nice to have something custom, so this is how you would do it. Render that up. Just frame it up how you want it. Wait for this to render. Cool. Yeah. Looks good. Let's go to, just double check our render settings. TIFF. Frame 1 to 120. Probably don't even need 120. Let's just see how long this animates for. Yeah, it's finished animating at about frame 80, so I will just put that down to frame 80. Everything looks fine, so what I'm going to do is hit save, and I will change my menu set to rendering, and I'm going to go render sequence, and yeah, add render to render view. You don't really need that on. I'll turn it off, and I'll hit render sequence, and it should start rendering here. No! I got a crash, and I think we had a crash in class too. So I'll hit pause and restart mine and try and figure this one out. So for whatever reason, I finally got it to render. It was something to do with this deformable type. For whatever reason, it turned itself off, and right before it rendered. So I went back to the deformable type and turned it back on, and now it seems to render fine. So if I know there are some students in class having a similar issue, so yeah, don't panic about it. If you're having that problem, I'll come and help you guys when I'm in next time. So we'll get to the bottom of it. But try that for now. So I had it turned on. I remember earlier on in the video we did turn on deformable type, but for whatever reason it got turned off. And all I did was go back, turn it off, and hit render immediately, render sequence, and it seemed to work. So I'm going to let this render, and I'm going to load it up in After Effects, and I will continue the video and just export it and wrap this one up. So now I've got After Effects open. What I'm going to do is just double click in here, find my images, so it's in your project folder, images. For some reason Arnold throws it in a temp folder. I'm not sure why that is, but it does. And I'm going to click on my first one, make sure sequence is enabled here, hit import. Straight's fine, yeah. And I'm just going to drag that onto a new comp, hit preview, and wait a couple seconds, see what happens. Looks pretty good. Still a little bit grainy. There we go. Yeah, looks great. So what you can do now is go add to render queue. That looks good. QuickTime, MPEG-4, H.264, whatever you like. And I'm going to find my Selkirk folder here. Fall. I'll just put it in here. And save. Hit render. No! Unable to open file. Okay. Well, you guys probably won't get that error at school. If you've never heard the infamous After Effects failed render, you heard it now. So anyways, just render it out. I'm obviously having some kind of technical difficulty on my end, but if you guys encounter the same thing, which is highly unlikely, let me know and I'll help you out. But yeah, so just render it out, upload the QuickTime video to Moodle. But if you want to hang on, next week we're going to be doing some MASH stuff, just like a little bit of a fun intro to MASH. We'll probably animate some curves and stuff like that, so you can add that to this as well, so for maybe some extra marks or whatever. So so hold off if you want. Bare minimum, this is what I want. But if you want to add in some of the stuff we're going to do next week, yeah, I'd definitely hold off and render it out then. So thanks, guys. I'll upload another one for the very last tutorial, hopefully this week sometime. So see you on Monday.